have?
Well, one moment, please, because I am waiting for the edition of the of the edition. I beg you to stop some minutes to prepare the presentation of the next speaker. Okay.
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 Do you want that I start my own slide, or is there someone who?
Okay, hello, Dr. Virginie Rigaud. Hi.
Hi, hello. Do you want I start my slide, or do you use the sample I sent you yesterday?
Yes, just a moment, because our chair of this session first introduce you, and then you start talking. If you want, I can share your slides, or you can share your own slide, whatever you want.
I prefer to change my own slides. It's easy for me.
Okay, sure. Okay, but wait for Dr. Juan to introduce you, please.
Okay.
Oui, Virginie, Claude, c'est toi qui contrôle les diapositives ou c'est le...
Oui, elle m'a dit que je pouvais contrôler les diapositives. Ouais.
Ah, ok.
Donc,
j'ai pas moi.
Did you see my slide?
Yes.
Not yet. You are sharing your screen, but I can't see your slides yet.
Did you see my slide there?
Yes, Dr. Vijayan, we can see your screen.
Oh,
slides.
fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, Dr. Brand, if you would introduce Dr. Virginia.
It's okay for me. I can change my slide and speak about it.
Okay, I can introduce you just a moment.
Yes.
Okay.
Owen, you hear me?
Okay,
Please,
we should.
please,
Karishna, should I
And did you hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
we can hear you.
Mr. Karishna, should I continue?
Just wait for 2 minutes, right?
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
If one is not ready, I have to say some word to introduce Virginie, who is a very impressive doctor who is very specialized in neonatology and main in human milk data and direct human bank milk of Necker and of Paris and Île-de-France. She published many communication and article, and she worked very hard, and she is always present when we demand her to make a talk, and this I know that the presentation will be very surprising and interesting about the influence of epigenetic on genetic, and we can she was explain how the first 1,000 days of infant influence the disease of infant, like obesity, and the disease of chronic adult disease. You can, Virginie, you can begin your presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So sorry for my English, it's not so good. I have no time to perfect it. So I think it could be very easy to understand. Today, usually I used to speak about breastfeeding and epigenetic, and today it's to introduce the next speech about the different specificity, and I only speak about environment and epigenetic and how environment could influence our DOAD disease. So the disease that not transmit through a genetic race. Okay, so easy. I hope that it could start. So actually, what we speak about the 1,000 days of the life, and it's a really critical period who start from the conception and go through the birth and pursue until the 2 years of the baby. So there is a period where the baby could receive the own mother's milk, his host mother's milk, who receive other nutrition. And it's a really special period of exposure. And what is important is to understand that it's a period during there is a strong body development. There is also a development of behavioral factor. And the baby have putting his hand to the mouth and have a ground game, so have really contact with the environment. And there is also physiologic habits, and it's part of his life who have a relative immature immune defense. And if sometimes the environment, and we will demonstrate that it's really frequent, the environment could be responsible for the development of pathology during this critical period. Actually, there is few reports about 1,000 days by different committees. And which is known is that the incidence of chronic disease has increased. We speak about asthma, obesity, allergies, diabetes, melanoma, and is responsible for 63% of deaths. And one of the objectives of these different committees is to train health professionals and early childhood professionals about this period, critical period. We have to take into account the environment as a whole, and we will speak in the next slide about nutrition, chemical, physical, infectious disease, and psychological environment. In France, it has been published special reports with experts who work about them, and in other countries also. And actually, we could say that environment and epigenetic and chronic disease are responsible for 23% of death and 55%, half of the chronic pathology. So it's really important, and it's why we speak about that during the two days. So I couldn't, okay. What is epigenetic? Epigenetic, it's the study of the hereditary change in the function of genes without altering the DNA sequence. And there is few mechanics for to explain epigenetic heredity change. It's DNA methylation, no coding RNA, and modification of the histone that could imprint epigenetic mark that regulate gene expression and interact with the exposome. So on that slide, you can see the three different epigenetic mechanics with the methylation of DNA, with the modification of the histone, and with the RNA, non-coding RNA. I couldn't change my slide like that. And what is the exposure? It's a few slides to put the definition in, and after we will start with the subject. The totality of exposure of an individual is subject from the conception to the death. And it's what we call exposome. Exposome concerning also the gamete, in utero life, the birth, childhood, adolescence, and adults. And actually the period with the exposome have a particular sensibility to the epigenomic change is the 1,000 days. So actually, we could also have and read a few papers about the fact that study epigenetic, study change of the exposome. It's also medium to have few biomarker and to also made a risk assessment and to predict some clinical outcome. So it's really all biomarker, risk assessments, and clinic outcome that could be a study when we think about that critical question, the impact of environment on health in the 1,000 days. Another definition is the DOAD. The DOAD is developmental origin of adult health disease. And we have already described the mechanistic. And here we could see some example. When there is a reduce of fetal growth during the pregnancy, they could have some alteration of the structure function of different organ like kidney, liver, cardiomyocyte, muscles, adipocyte, and this special environment, private environment, could put some epigenetic marks, and later the future adult could have some cancer, obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes type 2 through this change of the epigenetic marks during in utero period. So it's why we speak about developmental origin of adult health disease. There is no genetic origin, but fetal programming on embryonic programming, predictive adaptive answer, match or mismatch, and an adult response with the development of the disease. In fact, this type of answer of the fetus could be developed from a special environment during the prenatal period, but also during the postnatal environment. And it's why we speak about the 1,000 days, because this critical period could be responsible for the future adults' disease. And for instance, when there is a festive phenotype is predictive of adaptive response, this probably is responsible for the adapted restrictive interim response of the baby later. So 3 samples before to start to the direct question, 3 samples of examples, of the environment who have changing the epigenetic marks. This first example is an example with a change in the food, broccoli sprouts decrease, a special enzyme that inhibits the transcription of few genes. And it is quite protective, have a quite protective effect for cancer. So in that special example, change in food habit could impact the transcription of few genes that are implicated in cancer. In that type of example, it's physical activity. Physical activity could also change the transcription of few genes and modify next the expression of this gene and participate, for instance, to the prevention of hypertension or diabetes. And here it's a special example with animals with when we expose them on not sweet environment, the stress could impact the expression of few genes and modify next the risks, for instance, for obesity. So here we can see that food, physical activity, and psychosocial condition could modify the transcription of few genes and participate to the development of future disease. So what are the sources of exposure during the 1,000 days? It could be compared in two types. The first one is behavior factor, toxic like tobacco, alcohol, nutrition of the child and the mother, and environment factor like chemicals, for instance, insecticidal spray, paint, medicine, heavy metal with the bioaccumulation in the food chain, and endocrine disruptor like bisphenol, pesticide, phenol, phthalate, and acrylamide. And that type of exposure during the conception and during the pregnancy could alterate few transcription gene and be responsible, for instance, for disease. And here you can see that the mother could use cosmetic with a dermal exposure, few perfume, few shampoo, and they could, if there is, for instance, paraben inside, influence the growth of the baby. In that case, which is important, is that during pregnancy, the mother have an accumulation of lipophilic chemical in his breast and in other part of his body. And this chemical could be later diffused inside the fetus and later to the baby through breastfeeding. So it could be have a transfer from the mother to the fetus through the amniotic fluid and later through the milk. Mother could be exposed also to inhalation And this, for instance, during his own walk, or exposed to oral also exposure. And there, which is important, is the later transfer through milk to the baby. So the second part of the critical period is for the newborn and the infant. And the environment in this critical period could be the building material and decoration, the cleaning products, the furniture, the toys, the cosmetic, and probably, because I am neonatologist, I could focus on the fact that there is a special vulnerability of the preterm baby because of enzymatic immaturity, metabolism, dysbiosis, specific exposure. So we must be probably very careful with the preterm baby. So epigenetic change and a few parts of the environment. And we will speak about five type of exposition. The first, the nutrition, then chemical, then physical, then infectious and psychological environment. Concerning nutrition, origin of epigenetic change during the 1,000 days, the fish consumption during pregnancy could impact allergic risk in children. And we have to make a good balance between the importance of omega-3 and omega-6 consumption, like probably Claude will speak about later, but also be careful about the origin of the fish because of heavy metal inside. And so it's a special focus that we need to have a position about that to be sure that the consumption is enough, but it's not a bad consumption. There is a central role of breastfeeding for the epigenetic change of nutrition origin during the 1,000 days. And I give you a few examples, but Myriam Panard will speak about that later also. For human milk, there is an epigenetic effect of human breast milk. It's recognized. And this epigenetic effect participates to necrotizing enterocolitis, development of obesity, diabetes, metabolic, hypercholesterolemia, gastrointestinal and respiratory infectious disease, and some cancers. And in that table, you can see different human milk components and their responsibility in prevention of few disease and the expression of the gene who is modified by the component in the milk. It's not all which is illustrated. There is probably more mechanistic, but you can see, for instance, that the prostaglandin who participate to the prevention of obesity or disorder of the immune system could interact, for instance, with the PPAR and other factor who participate to the prevention to the obesity. So this is a mechanistic of the breast milk to prevent some later disease through epigenetic mechanic. Other example for the human milk participate to the prevention of atopy. And in human milk, there is microRNA who are transmitter and promoting thymic regulatory T cell maturation that participate to the prevention of atopy. And you can see a reduce of atopy and eczema at 5 years for the baby who've been breastfed, and the mother transmit more often factor who prevent atopia, where they themselves have some atopia. So there is a specific protection inside a family who is at risk of atopy. Other benefit of the breastfeeding is the prevention of obesity. You can see here that it's really significant data. And you can see that the efficiency is better with the more prolongated breastfeeding. And there is probably few mechanistic, like better regulation of the quantity of milk ingest, insulinemic regulation, regulation of the growth factor, epigenetic change of the leptin, and also over mechanistic. So the breastfeeding role in prevention obesity is correlate with the duration of breastfeeding, and epigenetic are responsible for the more important part of this prevention. In that study, they show us that the mechanistic of prevention obesity is transgenerational, and that there is also other type of mechanistic to prevent. For instance, the mode of delivery, perinatal antibiotic, formula feeding and not human milk breast. The dysbiosis also important factor that could alterate the microbiota of the baby, but also have other impact on chronic inflammation, on hepatotoxicity, on immunologic modulation, and on the intestinal barrier that participate to the obesity later. So it's not only one type of mechanistic, but it's usual few and numerous of them. For instance, antibiotic, the mode of delivery are important also. So to conclude for the first part of nutrition in the environment of epigenetic change, we could, for instance, say that breastfeeding, in fact, it's zero waste, no CO, no braiding, no plastic, no packaging, no bottles, no milk box, no preparation, no water bottle, no reheating. It's no manufacture of powdered milk products. It's no co-farming, no lyophilization. And all this type of prevention participate to reduce the programming disease of the baby, but also to improve the environment of the baby and decrease when improve the environment, decrease also this disease. So it's a directly directory role, and indirectly through a better environment when the mother breastfeeds the baby. Because in fact, breastfeeding is a source of development, economical, logic, biological, ecological, and viable. So it's really, finally, the best mode of nutrition to prevent, to protect the environment and to protect the health of the baby and the future adults. Second part, epigenetic change of chemical origin during 1,000 days. So the baby could be exposed to insecticide, and that could impair its neurologic development at 6 years. Exposure also to pyrethroid, like repellents anti-lice treatment, that could alter development at 7 years. Water chlorination by products and herbicide also participate to retardation of in utero growth. Solvent and could be responsible for congenital malformation. So in this few example, you could see that chemical products could impair the development and alter the development of the baby and the infants. Also, tobacco, which is really frequent, actually nearly more than 12% of the mother pursue tobacco consumption during the pregnancy and during breastfeeding. And the maternal smoking habits is associated with difference in long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acid in whole blood. We can show also that it could have endocrine effect on the offspring. And finally, neonatal exposure during lactation could have metabolic disorder later. And it's why we need to have prevention action and explain to the mother and the father the impact, because usually there is not only the mother's tobacco consumption, but it's a double consumption with the parents also. And it could have really consequences on the baby and transgenerational consequences on the baby. Other chemical products presence in the world. And you can see on this map the presence of the POPs, donc also endocrine perturbator. And you can see that there is differences between the country. It depends on the type of consumption and industrial country or rural country. And here you can see that there is really improve of the environment, for instance, for the DT, with different committees that participate in the world to reduce the exposure to DDT. But it's not the same thing for the POPs, who are more and more frequent, and it's endocrine disruptor, pesticide and phytoestrogen that could participate to the development of autism, hyperactivity, obesity, defect of reproduction. And you can have all these pollutants in fish, in industrial production, and this could be accumulate in the fat of the mother during pregnancy and after when she breastfeeds the baby. So here it's just to show you that actually there is more than 50,000 chemicals in the world, and it could be difficult to test every chemical, but some team have developed a special model of endocrine disruptor detector who detect the cocktail effect and could measure with this genetic label to reveal the natural reaction of the organism to pollutants. So if in the environment there is cosmetic residue, pesticide, pharmaceutical residue who are endocrine disruptor, they could it could be seen on this kind of special genetic label model, and this could be used to test, for instance, water or different other environment of the baby, the mother, and the future adults. It's quite interesting because we couldn't test individually each chemical, and to know if there is a cocktail effect, it could be sufficient to say that the environment is or is not favorable for the developmental of later disease. So third part of my speech, it's epigenetic modification of physical origin during the 1,000 days. And here it's, for instance, ionizing radiation, ultraviolet, and who could be implicated in development of cancer. But also nanoparticle, and we could find nanoparticle everywhere. Here you can find few products that include nanoparticle, but now we know that in artificial milk, we could find nanoparticle, and they're present everywhere in the nature, and they could have impact on the development of disease. For instance, where they be inhaled, they could participate to develop asthma, but they go also in the vascular system and participate to development of hypertension, and also to the development of autoimmune disease.
Sorry, in the middle of talk, I'm so sorry. Your slides are not moving.
You didn't see my slides?
No, I'm saying, but after a while, it is stuck on just one slide and didn't move forward.
Did you see my slide there?
Okay, I can see your screen, but your slides aren't moving. Press next slide, please.
Here you see next?
No.
How?
No.
So you never see no any slide, only the first one?
No. I think it is stuck on slide 11.
Ah, yeah. So perhaps I can. Okay.
I can share my screen if you like.
You see there?
Okay,
Did you see there?
Slide 23 now. Yes,
Did
yes.
you see
Now
nanoparticle?
yes, now
Yes.
I can see
Is
them.
it okay? Fine.
Yes.
So nanoparticle who could be found in our food everywhere, could have cytotoxicity, participate to cellular death, oxidizing stress, immunotoxicity, and participate to epigenetic change of your own gene. So participate to development of DOHAD. Okay. So next part is infectious disease and modification of the epigenetic during the 1,000 periods. Exposition to few viruses like papillomavirus, HBV, hepatitis virus, or alpha toxin, we know that it could participate to development of cancers. We know that the microbiome also have an important role in the prevention or in the development, it depends if it's good or not, of few later disease. And here you can see on that slide the interaction between the microbiome and epigenetic. So the microbiome could be influenced by breast milk, could be influenced by infant formula, and could promote DNA methylation, histone acetylation, and have an effect on gene transcription and later development of metabolic disease or obesity. So the role of the microbiome in epigenetic modification through breastfeeding you could prevent, or through infant formula that doesn't prevent, have a real impact of for instance, obesity. And it's why actually they try to put some prebiotic or probiotic or symbiotic in the different infant formula. And here you can see on that slide the mechanistic of the microbiota. When the baby is breastfeeding, we can have inside in intestinal wall microRNA transmit through the milk, and you know that the milk is the most rich fluid of microRNA. And the microRNA could participate to, for instance, immune system development, immune response control, viral defense, differentiation and maintenance of tissue identity, adipose tissue development, lung development, but also growth control, epigenetic modification, development of programming. So here you can directly see that through breast milk, microRNA could influence a lot of mechanistic implicate in future disease, and that in infant formula, there is no microRNA, and this type of prevention is not present. So to hand on the nutrition part, there is an important factor, perinatal factor, that could affect the gut microbiota and then could affect indirectly the health of the baby. Age, gestational age, age of the mother, gestational age, mode of delivery, cesarean section, for instance, antibiotic therapy, and non-breastfeeding. And we know that the effect, for instance, of antibiotic on the microbiome participate to the development of later disease. And this could be increased if we give antibiotic to the baby later and die to the infant for different reasons. Last epigenetic modification is psychological modification origin during the 1,000 days. And this study has been made about precarious population. And in precarious population, there is an increase of depression, of post-traumatic stress, increase also of the weight, of food insecurity, of pregnancy less followed, and urban pollution exhibition. So there is few psychological stress or condition that could participate later to epigenetic modification and to developmental disease. Well, now we have seen the 5 types of influence and on the epigenetic disease. And I could now show few cohort study to illustrate the different slide before. This was the Hermosa biomonitoring study, a study about few Californian teenagers, and they study if they use or not cosmetic with endocrine disruptor. And they study if they can adjust or not that practice. So in that slide, we will see if it's possible to interfere with the environment and with our practice to increase best practice and protect the health of the baby and the future adult. And you see here, before any adjustment, all the teenagers use a lot of cosmetic with phthalate, paraben, and other products that, as you see, we see in the last slide, could have effect on epigenetic disease. And when there is an adjustment, when they speak about that, they decrease their consumption. So we could have a positive influence on our practice to improve environment. Other cohort study, it's Eden study. They survey population from during the pregnancy until the adult period, and they study the exposure rate for pregnant humans, and they can conclude that there is a high exposition to triclosan and benzophenone, so endocrine disruptor, in that type of population. So during the 1,000 days, mothers from the pregnancy until the birth of the baby more exposed to the triclosan and benzophenone, who are endocrine disruptor and could have consequences on the health of their baby. Another study is the Pelagi study. They conclude that 83% of the pregnant women use pesticide. Nearly all the women exposed to glycol ether through cleaning products and cosmetic. Many are teratogenic in animals. And there is a few data who demonstrate there is an increased risk between the mother who consume or use that type of products. For instance, there is risk of major congenital malformation who is increased, for instance, with cleft, with urinary and genital malformation in boy. And what is it important? It does some health professional and other professional are more at risk. It's nurse, nursing assistant, personal lab trade of the aesthetic, and run maintenance. So we could removing pregnant and lactating mother from the risk as soon as possible. And usual in different countries, there is labor code about that. So it's important to speak about that early to the woman to be sure that she could change and adapt its activity to prevent exposition. Last study is health study, a longitudinal study Française. Since the childhood, almost all pregnant women are impregnated with bisphenol A, paraben, phthalate, flame retardants, bromide, and fluorinate compound and pesticide. So it's quite, we could be anxious about that. And the last one is Esteban study. French population as a whole, and even more children are impregnated with different pollutants. And there is an association between behavior and the use of certain consumer products. What is important in that kind of study is that there is an association between behavior in the use of certain consumer products. So we could probably change our behavior to reduce the consumption of products that could be dangerous for epigenetic disease control epigenetic. So to conclude, actually, when we looking on PubMed, there is more than 1,000 response about epigenetic, and there is probably prospective study to understand the role of epigenetic on developmental disease, but also studies to develop more marker and to prevent the exposure. And a positive message to hand about epigenetic in health and disease, there is probably more window for action to modulate the environment and create a good environment for the baby. You can see during pregnancy and later, we could screen our habits screen what is the environment and adjust our practice to have a better environment, because there is some plasticity here, and we know that we could reduce the epigenetic change and reduce the risk of environmental development disease. So few operational objectives. What could be them? Raise awareness and educate children, adolescents, and youth about the risk to environmental health. Developing the skill of professionals in the field of risk prevention, and it's actually the object of this webinar. Encourage communities and elected officials to take environmental health issue into account. Improving the detection of situations of psychological and social vulnerability, addictive behavior and violence, and encouraging action to support parenthood. And for instance, in France, we have that type of key to think about of environment. It's for the family, but also for health professional. And they give conceal and different information about key to think about a better environment. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Virginia, for your kind and impressive talk. I think this could be a factor to increase our interest for the pathogenic factors coming from the. Please open the session for the questions. Any questions? Sean, any questions? Well, Virginie, I think it is somewhat difficult to link the environment nocive products with the disorders of behavior. Behavior is a real outcome of a very a lot of factors in ontogenic and phylogenetic sources. So the link directly to autism, for instance, to the ingestion of pesticides, I think this direct link must be fulfilled, but must be complete with the mechanism by this link has been stated, that has been declared. How do you think about that? I can assure you that I am absolutely convinced of this relationship, but I think it's lacking the mechanism to the union of a disorder of behavior to a concrete toxic product like pesticides. What do you think?
It's certain that we know that it's the only one mechanistic. We know that there is genetic is here, behavioral is here, and epigenetic influence also the development, which is important. For instance, is the example of the breast milk and the obesity. It's a good example because we know that there is the own genetic program of the individual. We know that when a mother breastfeeds a baby, the ration is different and the compartment is different. And we know that later, after weaning, sometimes the mother have not the same compartment with the nutrition. So this could influence also. We know that in the breast milk, there is a few mark about influence leptin and other gene expressions. So
Yeah.
but we know also that it's impact the microbiota of the baby, and we know that the microbiota influence immunitary system, and that is also implicate in the development of on obesity. So we could never speak about only one mechanistic, but which is important is that there is an increase in the world of this type of disease, and that they have important impact because there is a lot of death, but doubt. And what is important is that our environment have changed. And it's probably one of the mechanistic, because our environment has changed. There is more and more pollution, and if we understand that, we could participate to the development of prevention action. And if we speak about that early at school, the child will have better comportment, and their parents also. For instance, for tobacco, we know that there is 12 women that % of the women continue to consume tobacco, but actually we speak about that later, early during pregnancy and before pregnancy with specialists, and try to influence the mother's comportment for that. So probably which is important, it's if we have no much efficiency on genetic origin, we could actually have positive or negative influence of epigenetics origin of the disease. And it's individual action, but also national and institutional action. For DTT, for instance, it's interesting when we show the curve who decrease for the DTT presence in the environment. It's really interesting. But the other pollutant, like for repellent for flame retardator, for instance, it's because there are more and more cars, more and more computer, that there is more and more flame retardator, for instance. So it's our habits, our comportment, our behavior who have changed also the environment.
Excuse me to insist. What I was trying to ask is that generalization about the relationship between toxic and a disorder of behavior like autism is very general and so inefficient for the direct practice. For example, an autistic child has a disorder in perception, a disorder in learning, in memory, in attention, and in reflection. What I was trying to ask was, in what of these areas has been involved, has been concerned the